There it is. Fuck, I forgot to do something so basic as to change the fucking model. Anyways, here we are. Amazing. Amazing. This is amazing. Once again, I can't say anything, but yeah, amazing basically. We were probably like yeah. I need to check my audio levels, so I should try to do it. And meanwhile, I'm trying to set up everything. Gimme. A second. I want to see if I can. Do we have this? Yes, we have this. Audio. How is it? It is working. Yeah. Okay. It is fine. I I never knew if we have low audio, good audio, bad audio. I never have completely understand where this audio quality sits. So that. But well, aside from that particular thing, let me extrude this from Twitch. Pop out shot. Yeah. And we shouldn't be. I am forgetting anything. I am. Let me check. I have. Well, yeah, I don't have the scene itself set up, so videos, properties, window. This one. Okay. It shouldn't change instantly, right? Yeah. So let me move to here. Wait. I need to reactivate this shit. Annotations. Yeah, shut up, annotations. There it is. There we have it. So, well, basically, a little bit of an explanation, just in case. This is another part, basically part 4 of our beautiful journey that is learning and watching and processing all the information that is given to us in this beautiful course. MIT 9. I think it is not 900 or rather simply 9.00 SC. I don't know what those letters mean, so I'm sorry I can't provide more context. But yeah, basically that introduction to psychology. I always wait. That was what I was forgetting. Let me this over here. It should be working. I think. I hope. I pray. Let me pin it and take this well. With the introduction itself done, let us properly welcome everybody. I hope we can have a great session today, learning, processing the info, and going over whatever it is that is said over here. And yeah, let me drink water, and after that, I will change the scene and we will properly start. Water. Let me see. Hello. Emo or Pookie or Emo Pookie. Hello, welcome. Where am I? Give me a second. No, wait. I didn't change the scene. There it is. There we have it. Just in case, a little explanation. We're learning stuff today, so welcome. I hope you can have a great stay. if that is of your interest, and let's leave it at that. let me close a little bit of stuff so that it doesn't lag. Wait. That was what I was forgetting. I don't have the window itself. There it is. Let me know for real. There it is.
So in the last lecture we talked about the remarkable human brain and how it empowers our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, our actions in the world, and how we began to understand its remarkable complexity, or at least
holy fuck,
complexity. How we understand the potential for things like moral character.
What the fuck?
To speak our feelings and thoughts that's blocked in a patient like Broca's patient with Broca's aphasia. We talked about the fact that split brain patients show us not only that the left and right hemispheres of the human brain mediate separate mental abilities, but that they also seem to have almost independent forms of consciousness, and don't have to be aware of one another. And so my focus today is to say we learned from very unusual clinical cases, and I'm going to focus today on tools we have to study the typical human brain. And what is it that we can do to understand how your brain, without having a hemispherectomy or a big stroke, how does it operate? And what are the principles of human brain function that give rise to the human mind?
Yeah. Basically, it is literally that we're kind of going to a lecture, So yeah. The only thing that happens here is I like to do it, so I a good way to say it would be I kind of dump my interest here, so people has to put up with that. But I mean, yeah, not to be viewed, I think it is still comprehensible, and even more, I also try my best to digest things so that in case of something being said is not by itself comprehensible, I also try to make it understandable for whoever is hearing this. So yeah, I'm kind of school with, let's say, what is it, with a particular teacher, I think it's their account, or with a, mm, not a special needs. What? Well, basically something like that. Anyways, so far, yes, the resume itself, now that I remember a little bit more, was we went over the fact of in in heuristics how the brain works. It wasn't real psychology, the last class, let's say, and this one I didn't pay attention to what it is that it is going to be about. I am amazed at my own incapacity of retaining.
So what are the ways we can learn about the human brain? And one thing we can't do is what animal researchers can do, right? That we can't literally go inside the brain except in very rare clinical situations. I'll talk about them, but that's a rare source of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a million ways in which we're trying to understand which part of the brain does which part of the mind. And we talked about the fact that phrenology was a sort of a big misstep in assigning mental life, the functions of mental life to the different parts of the brain. And so we hope we can do a bit better than that. And I'm going to review with you today some of the core methods, and there's a number of them for studying the human brain. The reason there's a number is none of them are sort of the magic answer. All of them are limited in their own ways, and we sort of need all of them to begin to grasp how your brain makes your mind. There's three huge ways in which we know how the human brain is organized. Lesions, injuries to the brain. Stimulation, when you're allowed to stimulate the brain, rarer, but we'll talk about that. And the most common, the one you see all the times in books and magazines, recording, functional MRI, EEG, methods where we record brain activity and try to understand how that relates to the life of the human mind. And so we're going to go through these things a little bit and show you how they're applied in some ways that I hope that you'll find interesting. We'll come back to many of these things as we go through the semester and as we talk about aging or child development or personality or other topics, social cognition. We'll use these tools to understand the brain bases of those kinds of aspects of our mental lives. So what's a big injury you can have? You can have a stroke where tissue in the brain no longer receives its vascular supply that it depends on so greatly. And a lot of different things like hypoxia, lack of oxygen. The brain is very sensitive to oxygen. Tumors can grow. You can have degenerative disorders like Alzheimer's, Huntington's, Parkinson's, and others. Epilepsy. So there's lots of different ways in which you can end up with brain injury and ultimately neuronal death. So.
Okay. Let me see. It doesn't mention also that even if you have loss of neurons themselves, you can. This isn't something particular deepening what was said, but rather an addition. There is the concept itself. I think here it was already talked about neuroplasticity. It wasn't talked about here. I am pretty sure it was. We will assume it wasn't mentioned for the sake of making it easier to understand. Basically, we always have the possibility of. Oh yeah, welcome. Like we're learning today. we are going to school. So far, we went over the idea of how brain loses its own capacity, and the worst part of all of this, and then ends up losing complete parts of the brain itself, which lead to neuronal death and all of that, let's call diminishment of the brain processes which we have inside of ourselves. But the main idea is not simply that, it is also that, and what I was going for is, we have also another tool in our hand which is called neuroplasticity. And it is true we can lose parts of our brain and we can't probably properly, so to speak, keep functioning as human beings. in some cases, but in some other instances, when we utilize the it is not a power, it is simply a tool that we have at our hands, the neuroplasticity that we possess inside of our brains. It is, how to say it is the ability of the individual itself to adapt and to properly mm, integrate knowledges inside of their brain. And it ends up meaning that we, in a sense, have the possibility of, even if beforehand, because of some lesion or some past, not only physical but also mental trauma, it, it seemed like it was impossible. As long as the individual itself keeps working and keeps, let's say, unraveling how it is that the intertwined connections that make the concepts flow inside of their head properly be something that they can integrate, and even more, they allow for the individual to process all of that and to put it into, let's say, proficient knowledge and tangible or acceptable levels of understanding about anything, no matter, or well, I wouldn't say no matter, in okay, in most of the cases, even if a lesion itself seems to be critical, the fact that also plays a huge role is how the doctors themselves apply the second therapy, that is neuroplasticity, and giving the patient the possibility of overcoming this problem. Because in general, let's say like this, you always have the capacity of learning things as long as you keep trying to integrate them into your brain, let's say. And even if some parts are missing, you can find different ways in which you can integrate that into your conscious or unconscious mind. And it doesn't mean that you will have a harder or an easier time just because you are doing it differently. It simply takes a different way to approach, let's say like that. So yeah, I think that's all I can add so far.
What's the strength of this form of evidence? Well, first of all, it's causal. We've talked about the difference between causal and correlational sources of evidence. Causal ones being more powerful for scientific explanation. A certain part of the brain is injured and you no longer can speak. You change your character. You no longer can make memories. We're pretty sure that part of the brain in some way is required or causal for that part of your mental life to operate. The deficits you see following brain injuries can be amazing. We talked about Phineas Gage changing his character, unable to produce language, unable to make new memories. We'll talk a little bit about patients with prosopagnosia, a good big word to go home on spring break and your parents ask you, what have you learned about? You say prosopagnosia, right? That just means a deficit in recognizing faces. Patients with prosopagnosia will be unable to recognize their own spouse by their face. They'll recognize it by their voice, by their physical movements, but not by their face. We learn amazing things about the brain that, until it happens, we didn't know they could happen, what people like to call counterintuitive. So we'll talk later in the course, a couple of times, about blind sight. Patients who say, I see nothing, but their behavior shows some part of their brain sees something. We'll talk about category-specific deficits, where patients all of a sudden can no longer name living things, but they can name non-living things, okay? So you wouldn't have thought of that if you didn't see that. And we get separations in the brain between different things. We talked about the difference between the left hemisphere being important for local features, the right for global. The left thinking in terms of functional things in the world, the right in terms of appearances. We talked about that already. We'll talk about other things that the hippocampus is important for knowing a piece of information, but the basal ganglia is important for learning how to do things, mental skills and physical skills. We'll come back to all of those. So it gives us this way to organize things. So much of our most solid understanding of the human brain still comes from the history of neurology and lesions. But what are its limitations? First, brain injuries don't follow anatomical boundaries. They sort of cross over things depending on the injury. So they're not going to selectively damage one part of the brain and not touch an adjacent one that could be doing something different. People can be variable in the response. Nearby systems, if you have two things in the brain that are next door to one another, do quite different things, injuries are likely to injure them both, and you will wrongly have a wrong conclusion about the architecture of the human brain. When we test a patient and ask them to do things after a brain injury, we don't really test the part of the brain that's not there. We really test the part of the brain that is there. People do the best they can. So there's secondary degeneration to an injury, there's recovery from an injury, there's compensation from an injury. When you test a patient with a brain injury, you're testing what the rest of the brain can do in the absence.
What? No. Ginko, fuck. Ginko, I am watching a video. Let me watch a video. Ginko, thank you. Thank you. Give me a second. Give me just a second. And well, I mean, this is so sad. Um, yeah. It is kind of obvious that it is a fucking bot. Give me chicken. Did it even try to get a roll and all of that? Racially. I mean, I'm thankful for your attention to it, my brother, but we do not let that shit fly here. Goodbye, my beautiful butter. Give me a second. Why do I have to deal with these problems? Why can't I live a proper life without having to deal with anything like this? I guess, yeah. Suspicious or a spam account, yeah. And goodbye, this remote. Fuck. Okay, now let me go back to the content. Shit. Thank you, Inko. Fuck. Anyways, there it is. uh, yeah, I kind of let me let me rehearse what I heard because I do not feel like going over it once again. If I am not wrong, it was talking about the different ways in which the brain can integrate the information, in which also not only that, but the fact that we kind of misinterpret the different results that we get. And not only that, also it was talking about the different ways in which we can properly see and try to analyze and properly find if what we are assessing is part of a particular relation or not. And I think we left on the idea that we sometimes do not test the other parts that are or could be related to the injury, but simply the injury itself and the brain part that has to deal with those injuries. Right? I think we left over here, right? I think. So let me continue. I would think. Now, let me continue.
One of his companions.
Wait, yeah,
We finally can offer limited views of normal brain function. Let me pick one, and we'll come back to this in the course. We're very interested in variation in people, individuality. What's the neurology of individuality? That's very hard to study in lesion cases because we don't see enough of a lesion. We don't have enough Phineas gauges to ask, would that injury look different if you grew up in one culture or another, if you were outgoing versus shy? Those kinds of things are very hard to answer, patient by patient. But we can test large groups of people with imaging and ask, what's the influence of culture on your brain organization? What's the influence of personality on your brain's organized? And you'll see later on in the semester evidence about those sorts of things. So let's go back to Paul Broca, the neurologist who gave the name to Broca's area because he saw a patient like this, like the tan, that this patient had a big injury in this area and could no longer speak. And every course you ever take about the brain almost will include a discussion about Broca's area. So I'm going to warp your world in a very narrow way, but maybe shockingly tell you, we don't even know how to think about Broca's area once we get more scientific than that. Okay, so this is MIT, so we're willing to tell the truth, okay? So some years later, Nina Dronkers did the following thing. She studied a large group of patients who had Broca's aphasia by behavior. That is, they had trouble speaking, but their comprehension was pretty good. And then she made maps of their injuries, and she overlaid those maps. And she said, who has Broca's aphasia? And if you have Broca's aphasia, what's the one part of the brain that every patient with Broca's aphasia has damage to? Because these patients, what you see in these maps is, some patients have damage here or here or here, but you line them all up and you say, what's the one spot that you have to have injured to have Broca's aphasia? And it's not this area that you saw in the picture, it's this area in yellow, an area called the precentral gyrus of the insula. The insula is a fascinating, mysterious structure. You have one on the left and one on the right.
What?
It runs along from the temporal lobe
What is yellow?
to the frontal cortex. Just a couple years ago, there was a paper reporting that patients with stroke in posterior insula instantly gave up smoking and never wanted to smoke again. There's huge research efforts to help people quit smoking because it's such a difficult health problem, okay? These patients, nobody's doing insula lesions to help people stop smoking, okay? But it just stops their smoking and their desire to smoke, just like that. This is now more towards the front of the brain. This is not what anybody in a book or a course will tell you is Broca's area. That's out here. But it turns out this is the hot spot. And you could say, well, what about the original patient? So kind of creatively, Nina Dronkers went back and they did an MRI of the brain of the deceased original Broca's aphasia patient, okay? They still had his brain. They put it in a scanner. And they ran a structural MRI. And what they found was, sure enough, he had damage way inside the exterior limit of his damage, as well as in white matter that connects to it. So even now, imaging evidence lets us rediscover what is the true main basis of your ability to speak, or its vulnerability to injury. And it turns out not to be exactly what Broca thought it was. He saw a big lesion, And he said, this is the part that matters. It turns out, as far as we understand, it's a slightly different part that he thought was just at the edge and not important. So we can get...
Okay. Wait, because I am going to lose the concept. It has nothing to do with this, and literally it is source. I made it up, obviously. But I think a way in which we can understand why it is hard to see and to comprehend properly why the brain works is, at least when this course was released, has to do with the fact that we still do not completely understand the, let's say, hardware of the brain itself. We can properly try to guess and try to assess how it is that sometimes it happens and sometimes it exerts influence in the individuals, yes, but I do not think, at least as I said before, when this was released, we had such a good understanding about how the brain connections and brain inner wirings work in the deepest level, because it is also in that same sense, if it were to be completely true, let's go for the idea that we happen to find ourselves in a situation in which we have to be and even more, we have, so to speak, to face things that are brain lesions, and all of those injuries end up making the brain itself work less correctly, let's say. Even if it is true that the brain is having problems, we can restore it, and even sometimes we can make it function as if it was never hurt before, somehow. So I guess it is kind of weird that in one sense, and in the other, it still is very, very awesome, I think. But that is that last part was obviously, in my opinion. Continue with this because we need to achieve more.
Better even going back 150 years of imaging of brain. We don't have many of those brain programs. Stimulation. So you like to go in the brain and stimulate. People who do animal work will go in and stimulate a neuron and see what happens. It's rare, you only get into the patient's brain when they have when they have a neurosurgical procedure and they're considering a resection or removal of tissue. You can also do recordings by putting grids on top of those brains. And Penfield did famous studies for patients with epilepsy, where he would stimulate and map things. It contributed a lot to our thinking about the brain, but that's a rare source of evidence, as you can imagine. Another one that's much more common, there's one of these devices down the street in Building 46, is transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. So this is one in which people are allowed ethically and responsibly to give you a virtual lesion for a few moments, if you volunteer to do so. So they put some sort of wire, there's different configurations, over your head in a targeted location. It generates a magnetic field that passes through the skull and induces a current. What happens is the current drives lots of neurons to fire. Turns out, this is kind of interesting, all your neurons are firing at the same moment. In one sense, it's as if none of them work because there's no information, right? There's a lot of different ways you could think about that. But for example, if on your 300-channel television you had all the channels on simultaneously on the same screen, it wouldn't be very easy to watch, okay? Something like that. All the neurons firing pretty much wipes out the function of that area. People do feel a little bit of a physical sensation. If you're prone to epilepsy, it's not a good idea to try this. So it does require some careful supervision experimentally, but you can do this with healthy people. And if, for example, you do it on this side of the motor cortex, people will twitch or say they felt somebody touch them. Nobody touched them, but the part of their brain that codes for touch just got turned on.
Wait, because I was noticing, I was thinking I was going crazy. Yes, I wasn't going crazy. I had the fucking background noise activated all this time. Sorry for that. And well, aside from this particular tiny error, let us continue.
If you put it on the occipital cortex, visual cortex, and you turn it on at a certain moment, you can put a word up and a word down, and the person will say they saw nothing. It'll make them functionally cortically blind for a few. So people have done experiments like this to suppress activity, to enhance activity. Sometimes it makes people even faster, like naming pictures. And it's also been used, there's still experimental studies of whether it can be helpful for treatments of neuropsychiatric disorders. So it's non-invasive in a sense of you're not going literally inside. You have a causal thing because you're turning the brain on or off. It's not very well targeted. It can't go into subcortical areas, but it's a very interesting tool. Let's talk about recording brain structure for a moment. So it's really important to separate this concepts between recording structure, which is a picture of anatomy, or function, which is a picture of physiology. So there's old ones, angiography and things like that. I'll show you two, computed tomography and MR, and a really cool measure called diffusion tensor imaging. And then there's functional measures, and we'll talk about those, EEG, PET, fMRI, MEG. So here's some different images.
Wait. I think I missed something. Let me. Structure anatomy. Only images anatomy. Angiography, CT, MR, diffusion tension imaging, DTI, function physiology investigates brain activity during cognitive processes, electrical single cell, multi-electron, EEG, MRG, metabolic PET, if MRI. Why
So we'll talk about
was I
tomography and MR.
upset
And a
my
really cool
then?
measure. So there's old ones, structure, which is a picture of anatomy, or function, a picture of physiology. So there's old ones, angiography and things like that. I'll show you two, computed tomography and MR, and a really cool measure called diffusion tensor imaging. And then there's functional measures, and we'll talk about those: EEG, PET, fMRI.
And what is shouldn't these concepts be kind of related? I mean, when you create something, you need to have the structure of say object properly put down in a paper so that it can realize the functions in which it has to engage, obviously correctly. You cannot expect the structure of your brain to have nothing to do with the different functions that it carries. I mean, I, I'm missing something. Why is it that? What? Anyways, uh, what? Anyways.
So here's some different images you can get from the brain. So here's what a brain would look like, roughly speaking. Actually, this is a postmortem brain. This is a cup brain. Here's the front. Here's the back. If a brain was open in front of you, this is what you would see. So here's an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, and it's pretty good. And I'll show you some more pictures in showing you lots of information. Not as good as if you were in there, but pretty good. Here's a CT scan, computed tomography. It's not as good. It's more blurry. And this thing that looks really sad, right? It looks like get your camera focused, right? That's actually the quality of the picture that we see that underlies maybe the most widely used tool these days for understanding the human mind and brain, functional magnetic resonance imaging. It's a very smudgy picture, but it has some really interesting properties. So here's the kind of thing you go into for an MRI, both structural or functional. And some of you have almost certainly been participants in research experiments or studies. Stick up your hand if you have. Just have, a lot of you. Okay, so you'll speak up on this. Is it quiet or noisy? It's super noisy. Okay, so so you have to have earplugs in, and if you're doing this is why people doing experiments with functional MRI want to do visual studies, because auditory ones are tricky. So Tyler, your head TA, likes auditory stuff. It's 10 times harder to pull off those experiments. Everybody tries to do visual stuff, so you don't have the noise problem. But you get some beautiful pictures. So here's computed tomography. And here's an MRI structural scan from the brain, the ventricles, here's basal ganglia. So you can see that with the MRI, beautifully, you can see the difference between white and gray matter. I'm always impressed that the gray matter is just this thin ribbon. I mean, cortex really means bark. It's just like the bark on our tree, right? And when you look at the brain this way, look at how much white matter there is. Here's your frontal cortex. Look at all that white matter, and then this thin cortical mantle or ribbon or bark. That's what we think of as the smarts of language and social planning and things like that. So that's a structural picture, okay? And then these pictures are sort of fun. You see them. Let's see. This is just recorded down the street. We're going to fly through your brain. Okay, here we go. Maybe.
Oh no, it isn't. It is.
One ear to the other.
Beautiful.
And you get amazing resolution. It's not the same thing like being inside the brain. There's things that you don't see. We know that, but you see a lot. Isn't that cool? Let's examine, what you can see now that we used to have to wait. Only about 40 years ago, you would have to have a person die to see this. So this is a patient with Huntington's disease. We'll come back and talk about that disorder. Here's a healthy person, top of the brain. This is the caudate here, part of the basal ganglia. And you can see in a patient who's passed away, that part of the brain is completely withered away. Huntington's disease. You would have to wait till a person passed away to see something like that, but with modern imaging, there's a healthy person, top of the brain, again, lining the ventricles of the caudate. And here in a living Huntington's patient, you can see the great withering of the way. Some of cortex too in later stages of the disease, but especially.
Oh my God. I love my dogs.
Here's a healthy older person, about 70 years of age, top of the brain, bottom of the brain, the ventricles. Here's on the left and the right of the hippocampus, the structure we'll talk about, without which you cannot learn any new fact or remember any event in your life, okay? Any new event. So powerful for almost every sense of learning. And look what happens in that structure. The same aged patient with Alzheimer's disease, it's virtually gone. It's greatly withered. You see it's much wider here because this tissue is greatly shrunk, the Alzheimer's patient. So we can see these kinds of changes in living people, both for research purposes and clinical purposes. Here's one that's more cheerful and more reflecting your experience. So here are studies of brain changes from age 4 to 21. They follow people, a large number of people at NIH from age 4 to 21. And what this shows is this color coding is the thickness of the cortex. And you might imagine that as you get older and smarter and go through grade school and middle school and high school and MIT college, and as you head towards grad school, your brain will get thicker and thicker with cortex. It's exactly the opposite. Ever since you were about 5 years old, you've been shedding neurons by the millions, okay? And connections among them by the trillions. And you're still going to do that until you're probably about 22 or 23. Then you peak,
But I
and you
mean,
decline and become faculty members. All right.
finally, that's
All right.
okay. That's finally shut up. As I wanted to say, most anything else that also started wow was I first and foremost, it isn't that interesting this one. This is already the second class. We're going over stuff that is more neurological. I mean, I understand that it has to do with psychology, like probably the course, now that I think about it, and the collection of what we have already seen, is an introduction in the sense of not simple concepts, more like different things that go on psychology, not real explanations nor real tools. Like, let's say, let's explore this particular psychologist, let's explore this way to do psychology. It is more like, okay, this is done like this is how it works like that, and nothing more. But it still has, I hope, some potential for being useful. At least in the future classes, I think, I hope, I pray, there are more concepts, less brain related, because in a sense we cannot touch the brain ourselves in any way, nor I think the only particularly possible manner in which we could try to utilize the brain and kind of change the ways in which it works will be something like mm, meditation at the very mm, not very best, the most exaggerated kind of example, because you still need to have such an interception that you could know what it is that you are doing and how it is that your thoughts are not simply being thoughts, but more like actions that are happening inside of your brain. But anyways, also something that happened and something that I was thinking, and now I wanted to say is probably it means, or it isn't that it means, it was shown here that there are some ways in which we could try to touch some neurons on the brain. Because when the professor, let's say, because I don't know who said some people lost the desire to smoke. I think it was some minutes ago, not right now. I kept thinking about it, and I think it comes from the set of if some neurons were killed, probably what was destroyed, let's say, has to deal with those what is it? Nicotine receptors that are in this case inside of the brain. I If I am not wrong, at the very least, then the gut, I think it is. I don't know which one in particular. I I barely know about the brain, so I will even less know about other organs of the body. But one of those inside of the stomach has to deal and also likes to get the whole nicotine sensation. And it isn't obviously the stomach, because the stomach nor the lungs like to have it. And in a sense, they tend to even inappropriately react if you were to smoke it, because they end up feeling really like you are, let's say, inflamming the structures in which the smoke itself gets applied. No matter what you are smoking, be it, I think, be it weed, be it tobacco, be it other kind of flowers, whatever it is that you're smoking, those particular structures do not like it. But in this case in particular, the nicotine that is contained in the tobacco has a great effect not only in the brain, as I said before, but also on the other organ. I don't remember. I think it was the gut. And I still do not completely comprehend how it is that by shutting down something that is not only on the brain, the whole desire stopped being effective. I guess it also has to do probably with the whole. I don't think it's way in which the individual sees the act of smoking. But anyways, continue.
Right. Okay. So, but that's kind of really interesting. We'll come back to this. That what happens is your
Mhm.
brain gets smart, experienced, knowledgeable. All the differences between you now, if you're 17, 18, 19, 20, and when you were 4, it all goes with your cortex getting thinner. And we'll come back to that and how people think about that. But let's see if I can get this next movie to run. So there's also an ordering, and we'll come back to this. I want to show you this movie. So the more blue you are, the thinner you are, the more advanced you are in terms of ultimate young adult development. Here's visual cortex, vision coming in. This is somatomotor cortex, how you feel your body and how you move yourself. And what you'll see is, as you go from age 4 to 21, the blue spreads. That spreading is your brain maturing in higher thought areas, okay? So we're going to review your life on average right now. Here you go.
Holy fuck, once again.
Now you're ready to graduate, okay? All right? It's kind of an amazing story, a fantastic brain changes that move you from what you could do and not do at 4 to what you can do and not do at age 20. And, you know, we couldn't see these things. We couldn't begin to see these things until just a few years ago in any scientific sense. I mean, all of these things were like miraculous sources. So let's make another thing, and we'll tie it to schoolwork. And then here's the structure. We said the hippocampus, so important for the formation of new memories on an everyday basis, everything.
Okay, wait, because I wanted to say something about it. In the same sense in which I love, before saying anything else, I love that I am literally talking as if I were somebody who understands how the brain works. Please, don't even believe what I am saying. But in the sense in which, as I did before, I mentioned neuroplasticity, doesn't it probably have something to do with that? The way in which neurons tend to die, and not only connections tend to get severed, but also the brain itself seems to be functioning less. I don't think it is properly less efficiently. I think it has probably to do with that, in the sense of, we might as well, because you as a human learn more and more what are the tools that you really need in your life, in the sense of properly developing an understanding and not having to intake so much, and even more, how to create so many concepts that will be useful for your existence, not only right now, but also in the future. I would expect that, in that sense, the role of the neuroplasticity is to increase the understanding that you have about those tools which you are going to utilize, and discard all the other parts that you will never have to spend your time even trying to search for. Because nowadays, I don't think, for example, nobody needs to really, for the sake of survival, know how to, let's say, kill a deer with their hands, or hunt a rabbit with um, a simple rock, let's say. And even if it, well, in those cases, the rabbit itself is easier. But anyways, things that really are complex in a way in which you need to have those tools at hand whenever it is that you're going to need them. So I think it has to do with something like that. Well, I don't know. Let us continue. I have something else in mind. I don't. Let us continue.
That's important and that you learn. So here's a fun study they took, and as you hear it, think about its scientific limitation, but it's fun, as students to think about. They looked at students in medical school in Germany. They looked at a measure of anatomic thickness of the hippocampus. Before and after, they studied like crazy for a huge exam, okay, over some number of periods. So here's the before picture and the after. This is the difference between the two, sorry. And what they're showing you is that as you study, your hippocampus got thicker as you crammed for your test, right? So, will there be a day where instead of having to give you tests, we could just measure the thickness of your hippocampus and know how much you studied, and you could just zoom in and out of a scanner? I don't know. But one cool thing about it is it's showing you that we can see structural changes not just on a giant scale from when you're 4 to 21, but from some number of months of experience, we can see a physical change in your brain. Now, that's trivial for animal researchers. They can show amazing things in seconds, okay? But to see the human brain physically changing. So let's look at another one, slightly more controlled.
Wait. What was it that he...
Brain. Now, that's trivial for animal researchers. They can show amazing things in seconds, okay? But to see the human brain physically changing. So let's look at another one, slightly more controlled.
Well, I mean, okay. In a sense, adding up to this, it is okay that it is not amazing in the sense of, you can observe how much your brain changes, and wow, be amazed on one hand, but in the other, it kind of serves the purpose of proving that when you put the work and when you act on itself, the necessity or the desire, at the very least, of learning about something, it is not something that simply exists in your mind. Literally, physical changes are being produced inside of you. And I would even say, yeah, I don't know if it is the proper way to say it or not, but in a way in which you are constantly engaging in activities that require brain active thinking and even more, as I said before, engagement from your part, and let's say rationalizing and analyzing of the different problems that have to do with your life, you will not only keep progressing and having those parts active, but also at the very least you will maintain them in the state in which they were before. It, I don't see why they would be wow, not so amazing. I think they are more on the sense of it shows that really the brain is a machine, let's say like that, that has a lot more of possibilities of being useful than what we expected before. It isn't simply like it was in other occasions, something that you could utilize and not worry about. Because, yeah, today I have to, I don't know, take a test. I will study for today and never once again worry about it. And let's say I will spend the next 4 weeks literally doing nothing with my brain. It is more like, okay, I studied and now, do I want to keep not only the knowledge, because it might as well not be useful to have it, but do I want to keep my brain functioning at such a high, let's say, capacity or not? If I want to have it, I have to accept that I need to utilize it. If I do not have an interest in maintaining the quality of my brain itself, I will not worry about it. But it rests in the yeah, in the individual itself, in this particular case. Yeah, I don't know, I don't know. Basically that, because it was kind of weird to say, wow, it isn't that amazing. What? My brother, it is kind of the opposite. At holy fuck. Yeah, at least in my eyes, it seems to be more interesting than what little credit it was given right now. So, yeah, continue. Wow.
Let's look at two more examples. London taxi cab drivers. Now, if you've traveled in various cities and gone in various taxis, you may have had better and worse experiences whether the taxi driver knows where he or she is going exactly. London is famous for having a very high code. Taxi drivers have to take big exams to get their official taxi license. Okay, so they create a very demanding thing. And what they asked is the hippocampus. If you learn lots of routes, if you know tons of routes in London, what happens to the hippocampus as it's memorizing all these spatial routes? And what they saw, the taxi drivers had bigger hippocampi, and the longer they drove, the bigger it was. So is this a causal or correlational source of evidence?
Causal,
Correlational, right?
right?
You know,
Oh
some drivers have
no!
bigger hippocampi, and now maybe that's simply because what? Maybe somebody who's an awesome hippocampus is ready to go to be a taxi driver, right? Maybe they passed the test. They said, I'm an awesome taxi, and the one who got lost all the time and was driving to the wrong airport and stuff, small hippocampus never became a taxi driver, right? So now the size of the hippocampus is the cause of your success, not the consequence. Because the longer you drove, the bigger it got, that kind of goes with that. You know, but you could do a causal experiment this way. They taught people to juggle 3 balls. They practiced every day for 3 months. 3 months juggling every day. What you see in yellow are parts of the brain, that's a statistical map, parts of the brain that significantly got thicker in 3 months of practice. They could compare directly before and after. It's a causal experiment. And these are areas that are involved in visual motion. And it makes sense that areas involved in visual motion would somehow change. But the fact that we can see 3 months of experience change the structure of your brain is kind of remarkable in a way that we can measure and scientifically scrutinize. You might be curious if you did 3 months of this and you were a pretty good juggler, you're impressing your friends at parties, your brain scan is different, right? What do you think happened? They followed these people up after the juggling requirement stopped. It kind of stopped most of the people. They were too busy. They would show off here and there, but that was it. They measured the brains again about 6 months later, and this change was gone. It came in, went out with the activity. Okay, it's activity dependent. So depending on what you do, you could think about every activity, mental and physical, that you do is constantly slightly.
Yeah, basically that. I mean, in that sense, it could even be interpreted. It is a common thing that gets thrown around, the concept of the brain is a muscle. In this prime example, we could say like this: the brain is the muscle which has the most rapid or the most rapid uh, creation and, let's say, betterment of a muscle itself, and also the at the same time fastest loosening or destruction, let's say, of those same muscles that you created beforehand, as long as you are not using them. So it means only that as long as you are properly doing something repeatedly enough so that at the very least it keeps being on that level, you will have that tool at hand. I mean, why would it be kind of weird to yeah, I don't know why. I don't think it even was pointed out as if it was weird. Simply, it is interesting to see. Let's leave it at that. It is interesting. Continue.
And if you do a lot of it, you're fundamentally changing it. But if you stop doing it, go right back to where you were because you're going to be doing something else. And another fun measure that's kind of beautiful and intriguing is diffusion tensor imaging. Now, everything we've talked about so far has been gray matter of the brain, the neuron.
Wait, before continue, I have a question. Teacher, I have a question. Fuck, I can. How? Where? What is the part that has to deal with? How is it called? Muscle memory. What is that part? Or is the muscle memory more likely? How it is properly said? Um, stored in the muscles themselves. It isn't like that, right? It should be in the brain. Because, I mean, the question is, should it be that the muscle memory which you gain could prevail enough so that no matter how many years still end up passing, it will still retrieve those particular muscle memories to, let's say, have, a, have an easier time redeveloping yourself to the point in which you were before? Let's say like that, because I guess in this case I don't have the possibility of remote, so I can only post this as a question, I guess. But because I was remembering a lot of times I have seen people and also myself, when you stop doing a physical activity, even if it has been years, as long as you're able to retrieve, well, not only the physical memories that you have, but also the memories themselves that you have about those actions, you can properly go back and do them as you were after some period of, let's say, warming up. But it requires to have created such quality memories that you can properly say, okay, I know I can do it in this particular way, and I know I can engage in this activity more properly if I were to realize this kind of particular example. Um, if I did boxing and if I did years and years of boxing, I know how it is that I need to place my foot one in front of the other, and how it is that I need to stand in front of a rival or at the very least in front of a sandbag, and also how it is that my body should move so that I can properly realize the action of punching. But if I lose the memory itself, I cannot retrieve and also cannot go back to how it is that it works. But at the same time, it means that when you create such memories of such a good quality that you can properly retrieve them back, you have an easier time developing yourself back to that point. And if you keep doing it, you will only keep making those memories better and at the same time keep bettering yourself in that realm of knowledge, let's say. But yeah, I think that I think muscle memory, even if years pass, doesn't, or it isn't that it doesn't, kind of the opposite, does also play a big role in this. If you were to create such vivid memories, be it muscular or mental, about anything, you could probably do it, let's say. So yeah, continue.
And the circuits they form. We're going to turn to white matter, which is the myelinated axons that are the super conducting sort of highways of the brain. And what diffusion tensor imaging does, it shows you something about the organization of that white matter, measuring directly the movement of water at very, very tiny distances. So this is a cross-section of a myelinated nerve fiber. Those are the fibers that are covered with white matter that have to go some distance. And the myelin protects the quality and speed of that signal through your brain. And you can see at the level of, if you're a tiny, tiny drop of water or smaller than that, this is a pretty big bump in the road, okay? So imagine you're a little drop of water moving a little bit, and you bump up against the myelin, you go, oh, can't go that way, and you go back this way, and you go with the flow. You go parallel with the myelin. It's hard to cross it at that microscopic scale. But we can measure that movement in areas where it's highly constrained, the anisotropy of the water. Here's cerebrospinal fluid, things can go anywhere. Here's where there's a lot of white matter, and the water tends to flow along parallel with white matter just for physical reasons. It can't cross it over. And here, for example, is a statistical map comparing this measure of white matter organization between adults who either in their childhood had a diagnosis of dyslexia, reading was difficult for these individuals, or people who had typical reading development where reading was, you learned to read and it wasn't particularly. And you can see that in this area around the temporal parietal cortex, there's a significant difference. But when we look, we can do one more thing. These are reading scores this way. This is the measure of the white matter organization from the diffusion tensor imaging. Each of these is an individual person now. So the open dots are the people who had typical reading development. The filled dots are the people who had poor development. And you can see it's pretty continuous. Even in the people with the open circles who never had a problem, the better they read, the more the organization is here. Okay, so this is not just a difference between good and bad readers. It's a difference between people who are really good readers and medium readers and poor readers, right? Continuous. So now, cause or effect. For those of you who had awesome myelin, we're going, reading's a snap. I love this stuff. You know, where's War and Peace, Mom? Right? Okay. Or were you like the jugglers and you were reading a lot and you were exercising this part of the brain and you altered its physical structure? And the answer is we don't know. How could we know? How could we know? If you were a scientist and were given a pot of money to do this, how could you know? Well, yeah. Yeah, do a longitudinal study. Start like before people read, right? And you can see, well, is it different then? You know, are we born to be big readers? Or by being big readers, do we alter the architecture of our brain? You know, what's the effort and what's the talent? What's the predisposition at birth? And what's the time you put in creating this part? And we don't know that yet, but you know, we have a place to look at that. And then you can create these kinds of beautiful pictures, and I'll say a word about this. So this is an individual person's white matter organization. We could take this picture of you or anybody you know who wants to go in a scanner. And what's color-coded in blue are fibers that are running up or down. We can't tell whether the fibers, which direction they're going, kind of, but we can tell their orientations, up and down, left and right in red, up and down in blue, and green is front to back. Pretty cool, huh?
What the fuck? Amazing.
We do that again. I like it. But I work in this area, so. I mean, this is fantastic. This is an individual person's white matter organization. I mean, you know, as information's flowing around in your mind, here's the paths that's flowing around in this. Do anything that's interesting in your feelings or thoughts. It's fantastic. I can tell you that the algorithms that are used to create these maps, there's some debate about the better ones. Okay, so the last steps of this are a bit debated and a bit depending on how cool you are as a visual engineer. But there's a lot of things that's right about diffusion tensor imaging. So there's a lot of things that are right about it. Okay, so function. So you know, most of all, we're interested in structure, not just for itself, but how it makes your mind do the things you can do. And when we think about different functional measures that are available to neuroscientists or psychologists, you know, we often think in two dimensions: spatial resolution and temporal resolution. How precise are we where we are, and you know, what's the time scale that we're measuring in? You know, millisecond? Are we averaging over many seconds, many hours? We know mental operations, roughly speaking, occur at the millisecond level, or maybe 10 milliseconds. There's no answer to that, but we know lots of things happen that fast in the mind. So as you look at this here, you can see that, for example, if you're in animal work, looking at size, you can get down to the synapse or the dendrite. We can't touch that in humans. We can't touch that cellular stuff. And it's not until we get up to here, you know, which is like big patches of the brain, that we can state things about people. That's why it's always going to be fundamental in neuroscience to sort of link the human work to the animal work, because we can't get to the neurons or anything like that in a person almost ever. Right? That has to come from animals where you can do it. So we have to look at pretty big patches of the human brain.
Please remove human
How about
rights?
Well, we can get down to milliseconds in time in the human brain. Functional things like PET and MRI are here in the order of about multiple seconds. I'll come back to this. But you can see all these things have strengths. Now, you don't always want to be down to a single synapse. It's not clear that we would understand much of the organization brain at the level of a synapse. Okay? There's things happening in synapse, but a thing like knowledge or love or something like that, probably we can't study at the level of the synapse effectively yet. Bigger units are probably more interpretable. So here's a fun one: EEGs, electroencephalography. So they put on your head some sort of a cap with electrodes, and they measure changes in electrical activity that are being picked up through the skull. And you're picking up huge changes in hundreds of thousands of neurons. But you're able to do it millisecond by millisecond at the speed of thought. And the same kind of signals roughly used for the same electrical signal for EEG and ERP, that evoke response potentials. With EEG, you just watch it over time. So you can see these different rhythms that go with a person in coma or in deep sleep, asleep, drowsy, relaxed. You can see these sort of characteristic rhythms that people can measure. If you do an experiment, you can time lock these, you know, moment by moment, to some stimulus or task you give the person. So here we're going to time lock these. And then you get a thing like this that says, here's a response, maybe the first moment after I see a word or the second moment after I see a word or something like that. You can time lock large electrical responses in the brain. And you get some studies like this, and we'll come back to this, but here's a fun one in language, for example. You read a sentence like, you see it was his first day at work. Okay, that's the baseline condition in purple, not a particularly exciting sentence, okay? Although your first day at work is actually pretty interesting, but not to read the sentence isn't, right? How about this one? He spread the warm bread with socks. You go, socks, I'm shocked, that makes no sense at all, right? What happens is you read it, here's a broken blue line, you go, whoa, and that's called the N400, okay? But that's kind of cool, that's 400 milliseconds after you saw that word, you said, I get it, socks, but it doesn't make sense, okay? So you're violating semantics or content. And then they have to do a control experiment. And a lot of psychology, and in a course like this, we can't devote enough time to this, but I can tell you high-quality research in psychology has high-quality thoughtfulness like in any other field. You could say, well, maybe it's not the word socks that's bothering you. Maybe it's just because it's odd. Just like I'm weird. It's like a weirded out signal, okay? It's a weirded out signal. So they do this. She put on her high-heeled shoes, but they put shoes in big print that you didn't expect, okay? So now you're weirded out, but it makes sense. So what happens in your mind? You have a very different response here. So here the meaning is wrong. Here the size is wrong. And so you can read a person's mind in this sense, millisecond by millisecond, as they understand something like a sentence.
Yeah, I mean, okay, stop here. I mean, in a more deeper level, it is understandable that people will try to properly measure in which ways it is that the brain tends to respond. Obviously, because in a sense, it is in this field. I do not want to use that word, but I cannot find also one more proper than simply say it is useful to see and to measure how it is that somebody could react to things in which they have basically a response. Sometimes you will find people and individuals more than anything else that are going to be completely out of the norm. But as long as you are capable of understanding how it is that the average human responds to those situations, you can even more create a pattern and also a scheme in which you can properly assess and almost adapt those knowledge into other areas of life, let's say. Because if you know somebody reads a word, I mean, it is basically applied nowadays in all of the propaganda that we see and all of the ads and all of that. Because we understood to such a level how it is that seeing some code or seeing some words, seeing some things in ads, or not in ads, in anything at all works, we ended up creating ads that appeal to those particular areas of the brain and of the mind because the focus is to arise those particular sensations in the individual in the case of making nuts. And obviously, you will want more than anything else to know and to have a proper understanding about those things. I guess, yes, it is very amazing in a sense. It is not the most amazing thing, but it is very amazing still.
You can
Continuing.
do it with babies, which is pretty cute, okay? And incredibly exciting too, right? So we can measure it in a millisecond. Lots of people can take doing it. It's relatively inexpensive. Why don't we just run around and do that? And we do that at MIT and lots of places do this too. Well, its spatial resolution is really problematic. We don't know where in the brain. We know where the electrode is on the head. That's picking up a lot of stuff below it. We don't know where in the brain it's coming from. The way I think about it a little bit, imagine you went to a football game and you were on the outside of the stadium and you heard big cheering on the side that you knew was MIT. You might think something good happened to MIT, then you hear big cheering on the side where the Caltech team, is sitting and there's fans, right? It'd be the usual Rose Bowl. And you might think something good happened at Caltech, but you don't really know exactly what happened and exactly where it happened, right? So we don't know where the signals are coming from in a very precise way. There's another method that's sort of very intriguing too, and we're just installing that at MIT, and you can be amongst the first generation of participants if you so choose to be. This is called magnetoencephalography. Active neurons produce small magnetic fields. You can use a superconducting quantum device to measure that's tiny, tiny changes in the magnetic field that are secondary to the neurons firing. These signals are problematic to measure because they're estimated to be 100 million times smaller than the Earth's magnetic field. In all these measures we have of human brain function, all of them, the signal is terrible compared to.
Well, okay, wait, but how tiny is a radio signal compared to the Earth magnetic field? Because we're talking about something, even the biggest human isn't 0.00001% of the size of the Earth itself. Obviously, what is the point of, I don't know.
Terrible compared to this. Okay, and Meg might be the worst. Okay, there's a number of places that installed Meg and had to take it out because the local traffic on the road was too big relative to the difference between the Earth's magnetic field and the signal they get. Signal to noise is terrible in every non-invasive measure we have. But you get something beautiful. Now, any mental thought we have of any interest of any kind, we pretty much understand to be the property not of a single part of the brain doing its thing, but a remarkable concert of different parts of your brain playing or interacting with one another. Okay, it's a symphony orchestra doing anything interesting. And Meg can show that beautifully. So here's an individual's structural MRI that's been inflated. They sort of blown it out like a balloon, okay? So it's sort of easy to look at. And what you're going to see now from Dale and Halgren is an MEG measurement, millisecond by millisecond, of what your brain does, roughly speaking, when you read a single word. Okay, here we go. Back and forth, back and forth. There's all this interaction, feeding forward from when you see it, feeding backward from parts of your brain. So I think I know what it is. Let's double check. Okay, back and forth, back and forth. Let me do it one more time because I think it's just so cool. Okay, anything interesting that your brain does is an incredibly complicated millisecond by millisecond interaction between large-scale brain networks. Here we go again, reading a single word. Arrives in the back of the brain. Front's thinking about back, front, back, front, back, front. Woo, we read the word. Okay, all right. So it's just amazing. And MEG, is one of the better measures for us to see this time-based way in which your mind accomplishes things.
Okay, if he isn't going to mention it more properly, I think it isn't my work, but it is kind of interesting. Hello, Vita. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Hello, Vita. Welcome. We are so far on. We keep studying a little bit. I can see properly which time is it here. I think it is 36. I don't know. We are basically doing that. We are once again going over some interesting concepts. So far, I can properly say only that we are seeing things which are interesting by themselves, do not carry so much meaning over and tools which we can utilize, let's say. The only kind of positive things that were shown not by themselves was one of the few concepts that was mentioned. No, it wasn't even mentioned. I had to extrude from what was being said, what was being talked about was we have brain injuries and sometimes we can cure those brain injuries by using the concept of neuroplasticity. So far, that is the only area that we have extruded from this. Right now, we are in understanding how the brain works in an almost symphonical way because your brain, as it was shown, I think we can see it. It isn't boring, so
here we go again.
We can see
single word arrives in the back of the brain. Front's thinking about back, front, back, front, back, front. Woo, we read the word.
And basically that. He didn't say too much, but basically it was going over the concept of how many parts of the brain are working at every single moment, at any given moment, more properly to say, and in a more profound way, I was going to say, it has to deal because a lot of parts of the brain are working in the symphonical manner, in one in which you, in this case, the example is reading a word. You first need to have the visual input. You need, after having the visual input, the interpretation itself of the word. You need to search for the memory of the word. You need to assess if that memory is correct in the context given of that word, or after that, if it isn't a context that is dictated by other things, you can extrude or probably guess if the content itself is correct for that very definition. After that, I would even say sometimes, not sometimes, probably, you need to bring up that fucking box. You need to bring up that knowledge of the word itself into surface, and you need to tell to the conscious part of you, this is what your reading means. In this particular example, it is unavoidable to have always a symphony working inside of you. I don't think it is possible to really see it and to completely understand how it works, I would say, because probably it could be broken into even more, not complex by themselves, but complex in the whole array of them parts that make this thing be a reality, let's say. Maybe it is not simply that you're reading the word, you're seeing the letters, you're putting them into an order, you're seeing if that order is proper, then you're giving it to the brain, and in the brain you're seeing if that proper order is correct to create a word that you already know, and it is correct to then properly assess, and blah 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 blah. We can spend more time simply going over the idea of, is this a deep definition or not. But yes, basically that. Symphony, wow.
Okay, all right. It's just amazing. And MEG, is one of the better
Yes.
measures for us to see this time-based way in which your mind accomplishes things. The strengths are it has great temporal resolution, non-invasive. Spatial resolution is maybe better than the EEG, or perhaps better. Not as good as fMRI. We'll come to that. And it only can measure neurons in the cortex that are parallel to the skull, so we can't see lots of things like subcortical structures like the hippocampus. Okay, so now we're moving to the measures that you most often see, but these other ones all help us a lot. And they're all derived from the following things. Sadly, for PET or fMRI, the most widely used studies to understand how your mind works, we can't interrogate the neurons that compute. We can't. They're off bounds to us, okay? The other measures you just saw are based on neurons. What we have to do is we have to look for gossipy neighbors, that is the vasculature that surrounds and supports neurons that compute. And we know that the neurons require oxygen and glucose metabolically to do their work, right, the cellular life. And if the brain area is active, there's increased blood flow and increased energy supplies that come. So it's all this sort of inference by the secondary consequence of neurons doing their business. So the brain is about 3.5 pounds. It's about 2% of your total body mass. It has a tenfold, 20% extra demand of body oxygen. Your brain cries out for oxygen. 2% of your body, but 20%
Amazing.
oxygen. And it's so sensitive that only 10 minutes of loss of oxygen can often cause irreversible brain damage, especially in structures like the hippocampus. Now, the first discovery that blood changes that are going with brain changes, blood changes that are the sort of the echoes, if you will, the secondary consequence, can be measured. Is low tech.
Wait a minute. We're talking about once again source. I made it up. We're talking about oxygen, and we're talking about the usage of the brain as a muscle. In this particular case, wouldn't it be possible? Because we already discussed the idea that it isn't that we simply discussed. The video mentioned, and I did a little bit more of deepening on the concept of the brain works like the best and worst muscle at the same time, because it can increase its capacities on any particular area in which you need those strengths, let's say, tenfold, or even, I will say sometimes even 100-fold more faster than anything else compared to any other muscle. And at the same time, the opposite also is true, because you can lose it almost as fast as you gain that. And without mentioning the other side, that was what was the name? It is amazing that I already forgot that term. Muscle memories. Without mentioning those parts, here in the case of brain as muscle, isn't it possible not only as a muscle but also, let's say, as a lung, that when you adapt the lungs to intake and to properly process more and more oxygen, because this tends to happen particularly in the people who has been smoking or has been through conditions in which their lungs had to process a lot of smoke, regardless of if it was intentional or not. That people needs or should probably retake responsibility in the sense of analyzing and almost assessing if they need to go and to regain the capabilities they have. In this particular case, if the brain is a muscle, shouldn't it be possible that the way in which the oxygen is distributed to those parts, and not only oxygen, but more like every single attribute, also plays a role in the sense of the more you understand about something, the more you can properly kind of, let's say, utilize it. Because your brain is also learning and adapting to the fact that you are increasing the amount of capacity and the amount of endurance that you have in that particular area of yourself. Because almost continuing with that analogy, the brain, in the sense of a muscle, tends to also get stress and tends to malfunction after some time of doing some particular things for long enough periods of time. And only when you keep doing them for equal or a tiny less amount of time, it is that you also learn. You can properly have it working in your favor, and you can properly, let's say, utilize it to keep increasing your endurance overall. So yeah, I think that is more than anything else. I see it as a good
Current machines. This is work from Angelo Mosso in the late 1880s, and he saw a patient who had an unusual sort of malformation, so he had almost no skull here, okay? And he put on it something that measured the pressure there. And he also measured, and what's shown here in red is this pressure. And as a control thing, it's pretty clever, he measured pulses of blood in the forearm. So those are in blue. Okay, that's the control. That's not just blood everywhere. And what he did is the guy's sitting there, nothing happening, and he noticed that when the church bells rang nearby, boom, this device picked up increased pressure over this part of the head. That's pretty cool, right? It has to be blood. It's not neurons, okay? It's blood, okay? But now he has the signature of mental life in your brain, blood consequence of thought. Hear the church. Then he asked the guy, does it have to be something that you hear? He says, did you make your prayers today, your Ave Maria? Again, nothing happening peripherally, but boom, as he gives his answer, change in blood pressure there, or do math problem, boom, a change there, okay? So all of a sudden, blood changes over part of the brain become the witness, that part of the brain supporting the mental operations to do that task. And here's a PET study, it's the first positron emission tomography, which basically measured local brain activity by looking at the consequences of photons disintegrating as they're measured in this. And here's the way they use this task to discover which parts to map the neural organization of the human mind. So I need somebody who's comfortable, who's willing to do a task at their seat.
Oh no! Oh no! This is going to be excluded.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Oh no!
Here you go. Ready? Look at that. In our field, we call that fixation. You're just looking, okay? Just looking, all right? Good job, okay? Ready for something else? All right, now just look at these things. Okay, you see the words? The technical word is reading, okay? All right. Now imagine we did one more thing with you. And actually, if you were in a PET scanner, here's what would happen. If in a PET scanner, you'd be sitting down there like that. There'd be a physician, in a lab coat like this. There'd be a physicist in the basement making up some sort of a tracer. They're going to inject into you every round of this, okay? Because that's what they need to sort of track this. And it comes up an elevator, and people take turns running down the hall with it because it has a pretty short half-life. The shortness of its half-life is what makes you able to do these multiple measures. It's a pretty big deal process. And in fact, the 1 or 2 PET sessions I ever attended, you would rotate, you would run down the field with a radioactive substance, so you would share the radioactive substance, okay? So anyway, so you've done that, okay? So now you've done that, and you feel like, that's right, I'm doing pretty good. So now they come and they say, are you ready for another injection? They have something, a catheter running into your arm, and they inject you again. Here comes the radioactive stuff, the oxygen, okay? And now they're going to ask you to read the words aloud. Presenting one at a time, oops, but why don't you just read them aloud one at a time? Go ahead. Okay, and they say, thank you very much, and we're going to do one more injection if that's okay with you of radioactive substance, okay? And now we're going to ask you to do one thing, and this is harder. As you see each word, tell us a verb that describes what you might do with that object, what a person might do. So go ahead, Rose, tell us. Perfect, okay. Yeah, I can tell you that in the experiment they present a lot of these, and a lot of subjects after a while just go use, okay. Hold. All right, but you did a good job, okay?
What?
So,
No, wait. Thank you, Alto. Hello. Thank you. Thank you a lot. Welcome. Welcome and thank you. Hello, and thanks for the raid, Alto. Let me do my proper work here. I think I don't have it set up, so I need to do it like this. Welcome. We are so far. We have been learning. We're taking a lecture about psychology. I hope you had a great stream. I hope you had the possibility of enjoying it more than anything else. And well, as always, how it went, how was it? If you want to tell us, and if you want to take a break, if you want to enjoy relaxing, no problem. I accept that. In a sense, I sometimes go overboard. So yeah, no need to really. if you are tired, exert yourself even more. Let me do it like this. Yeah. I saw it. It did really. Oh, fuck! Wrong button. It was the wrong button. I am amazing. Give me a second. It was intentional. I am a comedic genius. Shout out. Now, give me a second. I think this one is the proper. Yes, there it is. Amazing. It didn't happen. Nothing bad happened ever. Thank you for the raid. And well, I hope you have a great time reading some memes. And well, Marley wasn't there. There it is. I didn't see him. And well, sorry for not seeing anything. Welcome, Alto. Thank you for the raid. Welcome, Dr. Frankie. Welcome. And also, welcome, Brownie Bazooka. I hope you have a great tension and a great state. So yeah, now we can continue with this beautiful lecture. We were over.
Oh, here's what they say. This is just looking at something. This is looking at a word, which is reading. Now, don't forget, we're the only species that ever read. Okay?
No,
Reading has been around in our culture only for about 700 years on any scale, and reading is an incredible thing to read a word correctly. And you saw the whole brain flicker to get it right. But now you're going to say the word in the next condition, so you're not just looking at the word, but you're also saying it. And now finally, you're not only saying a word and looking at it, but you're thinking about it to come up with smell or pet, right? So they say what we're going to do is we're going to do a hierarchy of your mind, just looking, reading and talking, and thinking. And by comparing those different conditions, we'll subtract them against each other, pull out the part of your mind that sees a word, that speaks a word, that thinks about a word. We'll separate those out in the brain. So basically the subtraction method. So when we compare looking at fixation versus looking at words, we'll see what part of your brain discovers that it's a word, knows how to read words. Looking at words versus repeating them, we'll discover the basis of speech. Speaking a word versus coming up with a verb, thinking about stuff, their meaning, and coming up with an answer. So again, the idea is if you're saying something like, pet for the cat, you're doing all these things, or you might just be reading it aloud, and we'll subtract them. Now, in both these conditions, here you saw a word and read it. Here you saw a word and came up and produced a verb. You subtract these two, and you end up with a statistical image like this. This is not a raw image of blood. All these figures you ever see, those are statistics of areas that differed by some statistical criterion, one condition or another. They're all statistics. They're not blood or raw blood. That underlies it, but what you see is a statistic. And here's the statistic. Now, in both of these cases, you saw the word. In this case, you simply read it. In this case, you read it in your head, and you came up with a verb. Why don't we see anything back here? Why don't we see the seeing of the word, even though the seeing occurred in both cases? Why isn't it visible in the brain picture? Because it's been subtracted out, okay? So always in these brain imaging experiments, for reasons I'm about to tell you, we almost always have to do some kind of subtraction. And I'll tell you why, okay? But that subtraction is very big, because what you subtract out, that's the heart of the experiment, okay? Your decision about what's legitimate subtraction. And the reason we have to do it is this. Look at these two things. Here's one condition, and here's the other condition. You see that they look pretty similar, okay? Again, signal to noise. Your brain is busy all the time, okay? Now we ask you to do something and see the difference. And the difference is very tiny by the way we measure it. It's not tiny mentally. It's not tiny in terms of the consequences for civilization and the world, okay? It's tiny because of the weird way we have to measure it, all right? So I can tell you that if I put on an optimal checkerboard, the psychophysicists have said this turns on your visual cortex, I'll get about a 3 to 5% change in your brain. If you wave your arm, I can get 3 to 5% signal change in your cortex here. If I ask you to do everything between seeing something and moving your lips or hand, everything about thought, emotion, memory, desire, motivation, everything that's big in our life, we'll get something like 1/10 of 1% of a signal. 1/10 of 1% of a signal. So is that, Tyler's like, oh yeah, because that means you have to test a lot of subjects and work 40 years on your PhD, right? So we have to do that subtraction, because if we just take a picture of what's going on in your head, it's so much that we can't tell what's going on at all. And if we have to do something that's pretty big, like seeing like a really provocative picture, we'll just get 1/10 of 1% of it. So we have to do the subtraction to have a hint. And then we do one other weird thing. We don't have to, but we often do it. We want to average people to make some general statement about humanity as far as we can do it, based on the 10 MIT students we test, okay? And so we scrunch everybody's brain into a common space. Everybody's brain's a little bit different, like their bodies are a little bit different. We scrunch everybody to line them all up so we have a common physical space. So by the time you see this picture, it's a statistic on an average of people in most cases. But you get an amazing story, which up until these pictures, you saw them years, about now the late 1980s, it was unimaginable that you could go inside a living person's brain, see what it is that allows you to hear a word in auditory cortex, to see a word, visual cortex, to move your mouth to speak, or to think what's a verb that goes with that word. Okay? Unimaginable, at your, okay, now I have to do the quick math, but you'll help me out. What year were you born in? 82? 92? I know, at my age, it all blends, believe me. 92? Okay, so just a year or two before you were born, this was 5 years before you were born, unimaginable that you could see such a picture. When I was a graduate student at Harvard, and the people at Washington St. Louis University who did the first of these and did an incredible service to the field, we said, oh my gosh, it was like landing on the moon, going inside the human brain and knowing which part of the brain endows us capacities. Now,
Okay, I have been talking for the past how much? I am amazing. I am incredible. I am. This is amazing. This is the real content which we came from. Yes, 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 yes. And my chat fucking died, and I just noticed. See, yes, yes, yes. I don't know. Thank you, Nico. I I guess I'm not crazy, probably. But well, I was saying mm, to avoid because I will have to repeat myself. Fuck. Um, Something interesting that was said here is how much of an understanding we have about the things that we do, and how much it is that the science themselves have progressed. Let's say even more because in a sense, and because almost in a realistic manner, we do not have the possibility of knowing how much more there is to explore. I think it's even today, how much 12 years after this particular lesson was given, we have not completely understood how the brain works, and even more how the brain could be even more expanded in the sense of, okay, can we manipulate actively the different neurons that we have, and can we actively change things that are happening inside the brain with a precise tool or not? But even if that is true, at the very least, we have the measurements that came from the reality that we are living at right now, and that is we kind of are advancing at huge leaps in those different fields. And what we're reacting to. Sorry for the clickbait. Sure, we're taking a lecture and we are analyzing content. I think it serves its purpose. This is a lecture, and we are trying to learn a little bit about what is it that we lecture number 4, Introduction to Psychology. In this particular one, we are not really talking about psychology, more like the different sciences that explore and try to make sense of the brain. We went over so far how different techniques are utilized, how different ways the brain works, and how injuries play a role in it. We, yeah, I did a little bit of a ramble about the potential of the brain on the side of neuroplasticity because I don't know if it is that this particular video is true or not, but it wasn't mentioned at all, so I wanted to mention it. And so far, right now, we are talking about how it is that some particular studies are conducted and all of that. Yet, it seems very interesting to me, at least, that we are kind of not lost completely because we have proofs and we have even more already some established context, but even more. No, thank you, no problem. We right now are also trying to see and try to comprehend if what it is that is happening makes sense or not. In, in the playfield itself, let's say, of okay, these different studies also need to exclude information. How much it is that we are losing when we decide to exclude information? Because I kind of understand in the sense that was said here. It is important to exclude some parts because the more things we need to take into account, the harder it ends up being to get any particular result. But at the same time, I don't think it should be that much of a problem. And kind of in a different way, it will be more, not more, it will be interesting to see how much we could really develop the tools that we already have at hand. And we could try to assess and to analyze if it is that these particular things we are using right now could be even more developed in the future. But anyways, we're not neuroscientists, so let's continue. So far, interesting.
We can be appreciative or we can be skeptical scientists. And we can say this. Let's pick this one. Let's compare seeing a word like bored versus seeing a fixation. We do that subtraction, that's seeing a word. Just by common sense, what's wrong with this comparison? It's okay. It's not terrible. How could you control it better to understand what this part of the brain is really doing? I heard something? Well, partly it's a meaningful word versus something that doesn't mean anything to plus, right? But what else could you do? Say is different between them. Yeah. Okay. In this case, oh my gosh, yes, I'll come back to that, but let me not do that one for the moment, okay? Because that's a giant story which I can't fit in today. Yes, your mind could be all over the place, okay? So that's definitely the case, okay? Hey, that's a good one. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's
I
perfect.
can
Okay, that's the way I was
explain.
going. The other one's great too. Two great comments. Yeah, you could say like maybe there's a part of your brain that goes with 5 things, or something this big versus this big. Now, that's not so interesting. A part of your brain that looks at something this big versus this big, but that's just as legitimate a conclusion here, right? How about this? 5 different things versus only this, right? There's a lot of different ways in which you can say what is the mental operation that I discovered in the human brain and mind. It all comes down to the comparison. So here's what they did to try to do a better job. They showed you, a more complicated thing that doesn't mean anything, a bunch of letters that you can't pronounce, a bunch of letters that you can pronounce, but it's not a real word. Here's the real word itself. So if you want to say, what do you think this part of the mind is doing? What part of the mind does this part of the brain allow to happen in humans? Only humans on this planet? And every word you ever read only happens because this part of the brain does what it does. What is that part of the brain doing? Is it just simply responding to complicated things, 5 of them? No, not much. Okay, a little bit, but not much. How about letters? Letters are pretty interesting, but there can't be a word by English. You can't pronounce this. Not too interested. A word, a set of letters you've never seen together before, but you can pronounce by the rules of English, boom, right? That's what I do, says this part of the brain. That's what I do, okay? I say, I see something, and it's possibly a word, and I can say it by the rules of English. And by the way, if it's a word I've done before, I do that too. I'm pretty flexible. I can do new words. I can do words I've known before. It matches.
Okay, Soros, I made it up once again. What if we were to, in the same sense as we were talking before, the brain works like a muscle, okay? And in this case, I was thinking, while saying this, we could kind of say this particular thing, this part of the brain is activated because you're saying something and you're trying to analyze and to make sense of what you're saying. In, in this particular or first example, it happens to be mostly here, and like it is on the third and fourth. In the second one, a different area, on more on the front, I guess is kind of troubleshooting because you notice that you see something you could make sense of, but at the same time is literally meaningless. So I guess in this case is taking more into consideration these two in particular. How much of a difference exists in the brain of an animal? And if the brain is a muscle, shouldn't it be possible to train it and to, let's say, exercise that particular side of the brain more and more, and even more in the case of oh, over different generations and over, I guess, eugenics probably, because I was thinking about it the other way. This is probably related to eugenics. In a eugenical way, you decide to choose those animals which have the capacity or with kind of shown they are probably proper, yeah, proper animals that can try to understand words. You take those, you put them in a place in which they are constantly learning about these words. You make them also have offspring, and with that offspring, you also do the same and repeat that, I don't know, in 5 or 10 generations. And how much of a change ends up happening overall when you do that in particular? Because I I guess in that sense it is more of my responsibility to see if it has already been done and how it is that it it ended up going. I don't know. But that is what I was thinking so far. Because aside from what is being said here, I cannot really have ending exactly to do so. I wanted to throw that thing out there. And now, obviously, as I said before, given this theory, Soros, I made it up. So continue.
What you see with language, that's reading. That's only our species. Take our visual system and the language you learn as a child, put them together, and allow our civilization. And this is the part of the brain where those roads meet. And by the way, we talked about local and global, the forests and the trees. And consistent with what we talked about, the split brain patients, you're looking at global stuff right hemisphere, you're looking at local stuff left hemisphere. So we like it when the information we have from split brain patients or stroke patients aligns with healthy people doing a task as they do. Then we sort of believe there's something right about that. So PET, pretty good spatial resolution. I mean, depends what you mean by good. My neuroscience colleagues, dismiss everything we ever do as sort of pathetically imprecise. But 5 to 10 millimeters, not as good as fMRI. The temporal resolution is very poor. We can only take one picture that lasts about a minute. and averages everything across that. You have to inject people with radioactive stuff, and it's correlational. Okay. But it has one other thing that's really, really interesting, positron emission tomography. Because you're injecting radioactive labels, you can create different kinds of labels that go to different parts of the brain. So here's Parkinson's disease, which we know involves damage to the substantia nigra, the basal ganglia. Here's a healthy person's substantia nigra. Here's a person with Parkinson's disease where these cells have died away. Typically, at least 80% of these have to die before a person shows Parkinson's disease symptoms clinically. Here's an injection of a radioactive stuff using PET that binds to dopamine-receiving neurons. And you can see that in the living Parkinson's patients, there's tremendous reduction in receptors waiting for dopamine. A living patient, specifically dopamine receptors. So that's a disease. Here's why video games are taking over the world. Oh, no, not yet. We can do one more thing, sorry. We can track a disease, from a typical person to a person with moderate Parkinson's disease or severe. So not only within the disease, we can see differences. But here's why video games are taking over the world. Because if we take a healthy person, young adults, give them this kind of dopamine binding tracer and have them play a video game, two things happen. A, parts of your brain that are involved in reward, dopamine is the strongest reward neurotransmitter that we know, go crazy. And what this graph is showing you is the better you do, the more rewarded you are. That's why you will go for the next level, okay? Because to get that dopamine fix, you got to keep going, all right? The better you are. So, I mean, and we think these reward mechanisms underlie everything in many ways. They relate to everything. Why do you do whatever you do? Because at some level, in some way, you find it rewarding. And the data is very compelling that way.
Okay, I think something else.
And it's the one that's probably, maybe most widely.
Okay, then. Yes, I wanted to say, from a more philosophical perspective, it is also something to take into account. Human has the capacity to think about what it is that they are seeing, and even more, what it is that they are observing and kind of processing. It is not only in some cases, obviously, I would say, and it ends up being unavoidable to respond to those particular things, and even more, let's say, to think about them as more crude or more primal action benefit type of responses. But in other cases, it shouldn't make so much sense as in, for example, when the human started to create societies, it started to go not against, but more than, beyond what was already established in the animal kingdom. It isn't that, oh no, you are motivated by reward and an action system. It is more like when you also introduce into the whole, let's say, holy fucking god, dogs, when you also introduce to this equation the fact that the humans can think about their actions, you also get the possibility of learning and observing. I can make my fucking point of observing how it is that these particular humans start, let's say, to play and decide what it is that they are going to engage with or not. And with that, I am going to move on. Yes, fucking dogs.
Widely visible. So you sit in a scanner, stimuli are presented to you, you perform a task. We do a lot of stuff in our lab with children. We show them, how the frog would do it. For those of you who've done a functional MRI experiment, because there were so many hands that were put up, do any of you want to say a word about your experience doing that? What was it like? Easy, huge fun, recommend? No, not so much fun. It'll vary a little bit. You said noisy. Some people find it claustrophobic. Yeah. Oh, so they didn't ask you to do a task.
Well, I think somebody's at the beginning, just in case. I think I'm not so sure. In a second, just in case. Because the dogs don't just Yes, it was true. Somebody was at the door. I am amazing. I have such a sense of reality. I knew it. It was all on my plans. Anyways, uh, I think I was trying to make a point before the dogs started to go fucking crazy. And that was, I don't know. Let us continue.
Maybe. Who knows? So the answer, oh, you were, okay, so for the student, they were watching a movie and not doing anything, right? And you were doing yes or no clicks. Okay, so that would be a typical functional MRI kind of experiment. Some of them are more obnoxious, some are less, some are funny, some are not as funny. You're endlessly pushing for things that are. Any other experiences? Was it comfortable? Not so comfortable? Medium? Okay, anybody else want to share? No, okay. So how does this work? So functional MRI takes advantage of MRI, but it focuses on hemoglobin, the stuff that carries oxygen in your blood. And it rests on the fact that deoxygenated hemoglobin, after oxygen has been extracted, is more sensitive to the magnetic field than oxygenated hemoglobin. So it's like this. Here's basically capillaries and veins, and arteries and veins. And as you go through the capillary bed, the smallest vessels, right, neurons are extracting oxygen to support their physical life. What happens when this part of the brain gets active is that more oxygen is extracted to support the active neurons. So, and we call this bold effect blood oxygen level dependence. So we're measuring change in blood changes the ratio of oxygenated to deoxygenated hemoglobins. That changes the magnetic field as we measure it. That's what we directly measure. That's not the neurons. So if the neurons are using up oxygen, why does the bold signal increase? Why does this ratio go up? And because intuitively you think it would go down, right? Because oxygen is being extracted at a higher rate. But here's what happens. If you look at oxygen being extracted, right after something happens, 10 milliseconds, there's a 10 seconds, there's a initial dip of oxygen. That's the neurons extracting the oxygen to replenish themselves from their activity. Their activity has been to give your mind its life. Then what happens is there's this vast oversupply for a much longer time. Now, intuitively, it's as if we said it's so important to metabolically support the neurons that make up our minds that if some area is demanding a lot of blood, we send over way too much extra as soon as we can, a distance, make sure everything's okay. And because our measurement is so sad, we almost can never measure this initial dip. We almost always measure the sustained oversupply of oxygen to that part of the brain. So you can say it's such a house of cards, right? The oversupply of the blood going to a part of the brain changes the balance of oxygenated to deoxygenated hemoglobin. That changes the magnetic property. And that's how we try to figure out what that part of the brain is doing to your mind. But it works pretty well in some cases. Decent spatial resolution, no injection. You can zoom in a scanner and do a lot of different things. Modest temporal resolution, because it's not milliseconds at all, it's on the order of seconds. And it's correlational, not causal. But you get some amazing results. I'm just going to present to you two or three. So here's one. A thing we're very interested about humans is empathy, right? How much we understand and feel other people's happiness or sadness or pain. So the observation or imagination of another person in a particular emotional state automatically activates a representation of that state we observe. Empathy. Yeah, how do we understand how another person feels? And we think that's a big thing in how we relate to one another as humans. So Tanya Singer did the following experiment. She said, talked about this before a little bit, embodied cognition. That we understand others out there by the feelings we know within us. We don't know their feelings, but we know our feelings inside us, right? So here's what she did. She brought in pairs of people who were friends or romantic partners, okay, pretty close friends. And she either had them get some pain, shock, within ethical boundary, okay, but not pleasant, okay? That's the pain. Or you got to watch through a video camera while you were being imaged your partner shock. So think about somebody you care about. Think about them getting something, okay, and how you would feel at that moment. And they asked in the brain, what's similar and dissimilar, and they focus on what's similar right now, between feeling pain yourself and observing pain in somebody you care about, empathizing with the pain them having. And what they found is two areas, something of the anterior cingulate, something in the insula, which we talked about before, where there was a lot of overlap. So this phrase, I'm feeling your pain, in your brain, when you feel for somebody else's pain in this physical sense, turn on some of the same brain areas as when you feel. As if the basis to imagine another person's feelings you know so well. Okay? And this is literally shown now by the brain image. Could have been a story, a metaphor, an argument. You know, this is scientific evidence that supports that likelihood.
Well, we're changing then. Question is, how much of an influence it has that the individual itself understand deeper or better their own, in the case of we can't properly understand how other people feels if we do not understand our feelings ourselves. in that same sense, how much of an importance it has that the human who is trying to, or not trying, this was an experiment, who is observing others and who is having those same feelings reflected on them understands and to which level it matters, like how much of an articulation you can do about the different feelings that you have is important for the sake of being more or less empathic. That was my question because I think, well, it isn't that I think I observe it as something particularly interesting. If the possibility of somehow mm, empathizing more with somebody who's going through any situation increases as long as you see it more and as long as you, let's say, comprehend it more properly. I, I, I think it has, or it isn't that it has something to do with that. It is more like probably if the individual were to be given the tools to understand and even more to interact with their own emotions to a deeper level, the capacity of having empathy with others would be also increased. Because in that supposedly good or correct manner of as long as you understand how you yourself feel, you can see others' reactions more or better, mm, basically developing yourself will also help to relate with others. I guess. I don't know. Let us continue.
So we're going to expand it in a slightly fun way. So there's been a lot of study about in neuroeconomics, thinking about how we think about, for example, things like trust. So one game, and there's a number of them, it's called the ultimatum game. Many of you probably know this, but let me remind you of this. This version of it has two players, a proposer and a responder. And what they do is they give the proposer a certain amount of money, the proposer, and then the proposer is allowed to make an offer to the responder. If the responder says no, nobody gets any money. If the and usually people offer about 50%. So let's make this concrete just for a moment. So can I pick you for a second? Are you sorry? You can decline. Okay. All right. You're okay. Okay. You're right there. Okay. So imagine if Tyler came over to me and gave me $10, 10 single dollars, and I said, "How would you feel if I gave you 5 and I kept 5? Would you think? Might you go for it? Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm $5 ahead. You're $5 ahead. Tyler won't eat this month because graduate student stipends are modest. But we just it's a zero-sum game in the end. Right? Okay. So okay. Okay, so now Tyler comes over and hands me $10 more, and I offer you 1. What's your first feeling, assuming that I wasn't your teacher grading you? You saw me get 10, I say, here's 1. What's your feeling? Think about it just, yeah. Now, you don't have to. By a purely economic perspective, would you be ahead by taking that $1? Yeah. Okay, $1's a dollar, $2 is $2, right? But people have a sense of fairness, okay? Even to their own detriment. If you offered $2
Yes,
and
this
lowered,
is
even
among us,
knowing that you're just ruining a
probably.
dollar or two you would have gotten for nothing except saying yes, people half the time will say no, right? It's like, you are so unfair, you were saying to me, I would never say this to you, you are so unfair that we're going to take us both down rather than you have the pleasure of the $8, okay? It's so unfair that my sense of fairness is disturbed, okay? Okay, it's an interesting way to think about it. Somebody, imagine a friend of yours is handed $10 and they offer you half, and if you say no, nobody gets anything, okay? So it's a trust game. So they had the people in the scanner playing this game with 2 people they saw in a video monitor. The 2 people they're playing with are set up, okay? The person in the scanner is the real participant. The people out there they see are confederates, they're play actors. And one is a fair person. Here's $5, thank you. Here's $5, thank you, okay? Here's $6, oh, you're awesome, we can get along. And then there's an unfair player. Here's $1. Why is this guy a jerk, right? Or how about $2? You go, no. And after a while you go, the fair player was very decent. This unfair player, who you believe is part of the experiment, was a setup, okay?
What the
Why
fuck?
is this person such a jerk? They're constantly getting $10 and they're constantly giving me 1 or 2. No, thank you, all right? Now, these people, you get a shock, and you see these 2 strangers, one of whom was a wonderful fair player, and one of whom was an absurdly unfair player. You see them get a shock, okay? And they had both men and women in the scanner watching these things happen. And here's what happened. And it's kind of funny, but whatever. For the women, they had overlap again between the parts of the brain that turned on here in the insula when they got a shock and when either the fair player got a shock or the unfair player. They felt bad for both by this measure, okay? Look at the men in the study. I feel bad if the fair guy gets it, right? But this part of the brain's like, yeah, give it to him. Can't you push up the voltage, I mean, it just came out this way. I don't, whether it would work that way under all circumstances, all ages, all societies, other groups of men and women, don't know. But in this sample, United Kingdom, the men had no empathy for the player. It's worse than that, okay? It's worse than they had no empathy. Let me show you this. if they asked to indicate their desire for revenge against, it's a behavioral response, their desire for revenge against bad player. Okay, now they're not. I don't think they pursued the unfair player down the street, and but just that feeling. Like, and the woman said, a little bit. The men said, yes, let me. If only I could take down this person, that would be great. And here's the amazing thing. We'll come back to the structure called the nucleus accumbens. It sits in the bottom of the basal ganglia. It's the structure that in the human brain is most identified with reward and pleasure. Most identified with reward and pleasure by fMRI imaging. Look at the nucleus accumbens when the unfair player gets zapped. Okay, you're watching the women. That's nothing much. The men, boom, big reward. Revenge is rewarding.
Yeah, probably. And very, very, very basic. Not wait. I am waiting because I hope the explanation is given by the video itself. There is
No
an
sympathy,
explanation that I
lots
can
of
know.
revenge satisfaction for the unfair player. Now you can decide in your own life, who this applies to or not. But it's kind of sort of fun. It's sort of fun to explore these different things, how we form ideas about empathy, trust. Whether they are in a society we grow up in somewhat different on average in men and women. Huge ranges within men, huge ranges. No, but it's a sort of fun thing to explore. So let me end with something that's much.
Okay, there it is. You are going to end, my brother. Then we go back a little bit. The supposed response or accepted consensus is men tend to see different money than how women do, because in a more deeper level, obviously, as I have said in other occasions, I am no professional. You literally have no obligation to take my word as if it were true. But basically, men see in a more competitive way things, and women tend to empathize more. That is why, in this particular case, in the ultimatum game, when you have somebody who is taking advantage of you, as a man, you do not feel like, oh well, this person is going through things so hard that they need to take these actions. You have no necessity to empathize because even more the reality that there is a money objective introduced in this, and even more, so to speak, a motivation for you to search for the best outcome because of those things. When things go wrong as a man, you get not angry, but you stop feeling more of the other person. And in the women cases, it happens that on average, as I have said, on average, they tend to see and to try to empathize with the situation of the individual who is going or who is suffering the losing bet, let's say. It, it isn't that, or it didn't present anything at all. Yeah, it didn't present a response. I don't know why it did that. I guess it was to ask the students what they guess it was. I don't know.
No, but it's a sort of fun thing to explore. So let me end with something that's much more difficult and disturbing, but another place where imaging is giving us insights that we could not have imagined having some time ago. So this is a very difficult case. I don't know if any of you have gone through it. I don't wish it for you. Some of you probably have, and many of you will sometime in your life, when you have to make an end-of-life decision. And amongst the most famous of these cases, was Terry Schiavo. Now, I don't know if that name even rings a bell for you, but it got very, very famous amongst these kinds of cases. So she had a cardiac arrest. She took a lot of diet pills, and that may have contributed. In February 25th, 1990, she went into a coma in a vegetative state. The vegetative state is when a person seems to be kind of awake, but when you talk with them, they're not very aware. They're not responsive. They're not noticing. They're not talking. But their eyes are open and they're awake, and their eyes are not closed. So that's what she is. And they put in her a feeding tube because without that, she wouldn't live. She couldn't feed herself. There was a heartbreaking difference of opinion between her husband and her parents. Her husband petitioned some years later, actually 8 years later, to remove the feeding tube and let her pass away. The parents opposed that. They said that's not her wishes. She wanted to keep on going with the feeding tube. The husband said, no, I don't believe that. She had this very tragic confrontation between the parents who loved her and the husband who presumably loved her, having different ideas about what to do with her, whether to end her life or not. So finally, her tube was removed, but then the parents went to court, the judge reversed it, and they put it back in here. It became, sadly, a kind of back and forth, living, non-living on judicial decisions. Her case became particularly famous for a bunch of reasons, and it went back and forth from court to court, moving up into state courts, and there were several U.S. Supreme Court decisions about whether to remove the tube. And it's a tragic thing. It's a tragic choice between the parents and the husband. It got to the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate. President Bush signed a bill to keep her alive. Okay, I mean, it was the highest. Everybody got involved with various opinions. Finally, the Supreme Court made a series of decisions. It was disconnected in 2005, and she died in March 30. So a tragic, difficult decision, a tragic family situation that became kind of a political and judicial football. So what's going on in the mind of somebody like this, and how can we begin to interpret it for a person who can't speak for themselves and can't? So let me tell you about a different case. We don't know her case. Again, a vegetative state is one where you appear to be awake, but there's no sign of awareness. Eyes are open, but the person's not talking or responding to anything in their environment. So here's a different woman, 23 years old, in 2005. She had a road traffic accident, severe traumatic brain injury. 5 months later, she's unresponsive, but she has preserved sleep-wake cycle. She's waking up, going to sleep, waking up, going to sleep. Eyes open, but unresponsive in every other way. They put her into an fMRI scanner, as well as healthy comparison people. They have them do 2 mental imagery tasks. And they can't give they read instructions to her. But here's you go into the scanner, and you're told to imagine 2 different things. Playing tennis. Imagine in your mind, you imagine that. Or imagine visiting all the rooms of your house, starting with your house that you are living in now or where you grew up. Imagine those 2 things. Now, first of all, just a pure cognitive neuroscience level, and we'll come back to that. Imagination is a really. It turns out when we imagine things, again, we use the parts of our brain that does them. Imagination is perception run backwards. We can see imagination. And depending on what you're imagining, you use the same system to see with. If you imagine something, it will turn on your visual system, and it's even more specific than that. So let's first look at what happens with the controls. When they imagine they're playing tennis, they turn on the supplementary motor area. That's a part of your brain that plans your physical movement. Okay, you're not moving. You're thinking about it. This is imagination. Plan a movement, you turn that. When you go around your house, you turn on spatial areas that are in the pericampal cortex and parietal cortex and pericampal cortex that are turned on if we show you a movie. See spaces, turn those on if you imagine spaces. Imagination in the brain. Perception run backwards. Physical action backwards, not actually doing it. But look at this patient who got in the scanner, non-responsive, read her the instructions, and look at her brain. Asked to imagine tennis, asked to imagine the room. What does that mean? Common sense. What does that mean? Did she understand the instruction? At some level, yes. Right? She wouldn't turn on those parts of the brain if she didn't understand. Not only does she understand the instruction, she imagines the thing you asked her to understand. So this got on the front page of the New York Times. The fMRI could tell you the internal mental life of a person who could no longer speak. Now, it's turned out since then that when they put in other patients into the scanner, most of them don't show this pattern. Okay, so it's not that every patient vegetative state is full of mental life like this person. And in a deeper way, we don't really understand what this mental life is like. We don't know whether she simply understands some things but doesn't have feelings or plans or desires, or whether she has those 2. We don't understand really the full range of mental life, but we know that she can understand an instruction. Her brain follows through with it. Most patients, turns out, don't look like that. So again, brain imaging has taken us inside the mind of somebody who cannot communicate for them. Let us say something about what is going on in that mind. So in conclusion, we talked about different ways of learning about the brain, different methods to record structure and function that vary in their temporal and spatial acuity, and incredibly different ways in which we can understand the organization in time and space of how the brain supports the human mind. Thanks.
Well, I guess to finish this in a not so negative note, just in case, it seemed, at least to me, interesting the idea and the possibility of, if it is that this particular action, and even more, the assessment of the brain itself with those who end up being in a vegetative state might show that they are what was the definition, having brain activity or not, could be a useful thing, and almost, I don't know if it is an objective or if it is more like a hopeful thing to pray we are going to utilize more in the future. Because in that sense, I don't even know. I am no fucking physician to say it properly. Yeah, we might as well have the possibility of restoring some health into them. I don't think it works like that, but it is kind of weird. At the very least, it seems that there is some way to try and test those things in people. So it was interesting to see that. It was interesting. And well, aside from that, we are done with the lesson itself. It was a good one. It was not that much of a long one in reality. It was very, very, very good, but not that much of a long one. There are some even longer ones, so we are done with this so far. It has been amazing. Um, we did everything that we had to do, and now I don't think I can really add anything else so far. We did our best. We studied a little bit more as always, and well, we kind of earned the possibility of learning a little bit more. Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you for being here. As I tend to say, as always, this is a beautiful thing that we have. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for lurking. Thanks for watching the VOD. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for the support. And more than anything else, thanks to you for being here. It wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for your support. So yes, thank you. And now, do we have the possibility of writing someone? Yeah, yeah. We have it. We have it. We can write someone. This is amazing. We can write someone. Let me see. Let me find somebody to say it. And well, tonight, if I am not wrong, we have a list. We have a list of topics, right? Tonight. So let me see. Saturday, yeah. Tonight we have a list of topics, and tomorrow I'm not going to be present probably. So until tomorrow night, we are not going to see Potato anymore. But meanwhile, wait, I need to mute. No, there it is. I muted properly. No more on desktop audio. And well, let me now for real choose some place to rent. And meanwhile, as I was saying, thanks for everything. This was a pleasure to do, a pleasure to have happening. And well, we might as well take a break, go distract ourselves a little bit, mm, rest the mind, something very good to do, you know. So here, yes, we're going to read somebody, and we're going to end it because this this is war, yes, but it is also true that we need to not overexert ourselves so much. Let me do this, and let me go over here and slash rate. There it is, and well, very well, as always. Thanks for everything. Next time, when the next opportunity arises, when the next chance appears in front of us, when the life put us once again together, we are going to see something, we are going to analyze something, we are going to discuss. But now, yeah, we pretty well earned the chance to take a break. So yes, goodbye, take a rest. Thanks for everything. Now, uh, I am incredible. I still forgot about this. There it is. Now, thanks and goodbye. Right. Give me a second just in case. Right. There it is.